Good evening to all of you. We are sorry for this delay, but Hilary had some problems with her connection. We hope that now everything is fine so we can have the event run smoothly. Thank you for attending this event. It's the fifth on a series of events we have decided to conduct under the general title, The Left Reflects on the Global Pandemic. Our guest for today is Hilary Wainwright. She comes from the UK. It is the first speaker who comes from the UK, so we do have this opportunity to have the British perspective also upon this European crisis. She's a researcher at the Transnational Institute and also a founder and currently co-editor of Red Pepper magazine. She will be interviewed by Golemis, who is the scientific and strategic advisor of our network and also the chief editor of our yearbook. In the first part of the interview, Harris will pose questions to Hilary, and during the second half, you can pose questions on the Q&A box below in this black tab, and I can read them out towards Hilary. She will answer, and then we will give her some minutes also to sum up or make some conclusive remarks. Thank you for being here. I hope this will be a very interesting and stimulating event. I'm giving the floor now to you, Harris.
Okay. Hi, Hilary. It seems that the virus has infected even your connection.
Yes, definitely.
The situation is very bad in the UK, as you know better than me. You know what is most worrying me is that while in all European countries the rate of coronavirus cases increase is declining, this curve is not rising very steeply. In Britain and in the US, the rise is very big. So it's not declining, in fact, it's still increasing. So possibly you have not seen the worst. I don't know what is your feeling on that. Do you?
Well, I mean, I think you must tell, firstly, you must tell me when you can't hear me. But I mean, I think that in a way to put the US and the UK in the same category, which is a fact, you know, it points to the problem, which is both as societies that are dominated by the market. So in Britain, you know, the health service, local government, all the institutions of public health, of preparing, of being ready, of emphasizing the preventative as well as the treatment, have been destroyed. And probably the same in the US. Well, they never really had a proper health service. And in both cases, you have leaders who kind of have like a sort of presumption to be almost godlike. So, you know, Boris Johnson, before the lockdown, he was boasting that he was shaking hands with people. He just presumed that he and people like him are kind of, you know, beyond disease, as if a disease is like something that just affects the proletariat, you know, and that somehow, you know, people in positions of leadership and the kind of, you know, arrogance of both Trump and Boris is very, of Johnson, I mustn't talk to him about that, talk of him as Boris, because, you know, he's not, no way is he like somebody you can relate to as a human, well, he is a human being, but his arrogance makes you treat him as just a sort of institution, really. Anyway, so I think there's that, and I think that the main point about Britain, anyway, is that there was a complete lack of preparation. I mean, the scientists had been warning, Chinese scientists had been warning, documents were published in, you know, medical journals like the Lancet, which is a very authoritative, very good journal with a very good editor who's been speaking out. Scientists who were advising the government and scientists who were independent of the government had been warning about this in January. And there was even a meeting, a COBRA meeting, which is a sort of committee of the cabinet dealing with emergencies. There was a meeting, but it was like for 1 hour, and Johnson didn't even go. And it was like, oh, this is nothing. This is just sort of, flu, and we can cope with it. So there's a sort of unpreparedness, and that points to the institutions and the culture of those institutions.
But okay, this, I understand that this is definitely one main reason for the tragic situation in Britain. But there are some people who say that it is also, what is happening is also due to deficiencies in the healthcare system. What do you think about that? I mean, why can't the famous NHS fight against the virus?
Well, because the famous NHS, I mean, it was famous and it was effective because it was national, it was coordinated, and it was relatively well resourced. People were paid decently, they had decent hours, and secondly, there was a kind of whole structure of public health. So every local council had a public health officer and an environmental health officer, and these people were really important, in linking with the health service to prevent disease. Now, all that has been massively weakened. I mean, firstly, there's been such a process of privatization, subcontracting, that, instead of a national coordinated system, it's extremely decentralized, but decentralized not to other public bodies that put health, the public's health first, but to private companies. And so that capacity to organize a response, I mean, you saw it most vividly. Well, you've seen it with the preventative, what's called the PPE, the preventative equipment, the protective equipment. You've seen it with the ventilators, with the testing, everything. The Prime Minister comes to the press office or the health minister saying, "Oh, we've got all this equipment, and then they haven't, and they can't get it because there's no proper coordination." And so then they raise the Dunkirk spirit and say, well, just as all these little boats came to rescue people from Dunkirk, so now all these little companies and people have responded. But to focus on a war metaphor implies the problem is treatment rather than prevention. I mean, obviously now treatment is key, but even now prevention is important, and that points to the importance of testing, which the WHO said, test. The British government, just was completely, testing isn't relevant now, and they gave up on, at one point they had a strategy of testing and then following up all the contacts of people who were infected. And then they gave that up. And actually the people who could have done that were the environmental health, public health officers in local government. But it's as if the national government doesn't know how to spell local government, let alone, respect its capacities.
Is there a lockdown now in the UK?
Yes, there's been a lockdown since March the 23rd. I mean, too late, but there has been.
But there is one.
Yes.
Because you know why I ask you this?
Yeah.
Because there are some people, and this happens all over the world, that they say that during the pandemic and with the preventive measures that are taking, stay at home, self-isolate, or the lockdowns, everybody, I mean, we are all in the same boat. That there are no class differences, no gender differences. While I think that this is not the case, there are people, and I presume that this happens in the UK also, that are either in the front line or have to go to work. I mean, they cannot self-isolate, isn't it so?
Oh yeah, no, I mean, there's massive inequalities. I mean, for a start, people, throughout the lockdown, people have been going to work, and we're not just talking here about the health workers and the care workers, and we'll say more about care, but also for a long time, construction workers, you know, businesses that weren't prepared to close down were going, and also there's workers, precarious workers, who end up going because they don't have the money, and there's not been, I mean, there's been money given to companies who employ a lot of people, and they get those people get 80% of their wages from the government. But then there are all the people that are not on full-time contracts or proper contracts, which we know is a growing proportion of the working population. And those people, like, are scared not to go to work because they won't get any money if they don't. So, I mean, like, I'm sitting outside actually because my Wi-Fi is so bad. But round the corner there's a station, and on my way here I just checked, and the trains, the overground, you know, which links into the underground, the metro, is still going, you know, just to take workers. So it's not going as much as it was before, but it's still going, and buses go, and so the lockdown is, I mean, in a way, it's affecting, well, the people who are over 70 and have a health condition have to stay at home, and then 70-year-olds like myself, we're told we should stay at home, self-isolate, and then a lot of other people who are employed, you know, and get this 80%, they stay at home. But even then, staying at home means completely different things in terms of safety and, you know, acceptability. So firstly, you know, there's massive overcrowding in many parts of London. I mean, one reason why London has got such a high rate, I'm sure, is to do with continued travel. And actually, proof of this is the fact that quite a few bus and transport workers have got it. You know, they're amongst the worst affected, and that's because, you know, infected people are going on the transport system because they need to get to work to get their money. And then the other thing is, so overcrowding in housing, you know, so people, you know, social isolation is all very well, or physical isolation is all very well if you live in a house with a garden, and, you know, there's just you or you and your family, that's fine. But if you're living in a you know, like 3 or 4 people to a room, or sorry, there's a garage next door that's making a bit of noise. But you know, if you're living in you know, these multi-occupied buildings, and you often don't know the other people, they might be going out to work and you're not. And also, you know, they're massive. London is very densely populated, and there are lots of big blocks of flats that have got no garden or anything. So, you know, not having a garden, particularly with kids, must be, you know, absolute torture. So it's very, very unequal. And also all the food, you know, like it's quite difficult, at least it was at the beginning, to use supermarkets because, you know, people had panic bought and there were endless queues. But then you go to middle class areas and you can get things delivered, and it's all quite sort of, you know, not too bad. I mean, I live in a half middle class and half working class, so I can see the contrast. And, you know, in the middle class bit of Hackney where I live, there's very, very disciplined queuing with people, you know, making their distance and so on. And then in the more working class one area, there's the supermarkets are really, you know, very frantic and people in a panic and so on.
Okay. So I want to come back to Boris Johnson now. I mean, the pandemic came at a time when Johnson had achieved his major target to get the UK out of the European Union. And also his victory in last December's elections confirmed his domination in a way in the British politics for at least for the short term. And my question is, did this handling of the emergency damage his public image, or the apparent lack of any kind of solidarity among the EU member countries during the pandemic confirmed his choice for Brexit? What do you think?
Well, there are two questions there. I mean, one is, you know, his strength, whether there's support for him and whether he's benefited from the situation. And then the second, I mean, related question, but whether Europe's behavior has in some senses confirmed the decision to go for Brexit. I mean, dealing with the second one, I mean, there'll be other people. I noticed Joseph Healy is on this amongst the participants, and he's an active member along with me in another Europe is possible, but he's been more on top of the Brexit debate. And I think that the image of Europe, well, firstly, people aren't talking about Brexit. You know, in a way, this pandemic has sort of overwhelmed the news debate, the news discussions. And I think secondly, I mean, the view of Europe is mixed, because on the one hand, it's so clear, I think, to most people, that international cooperation is absolutely necessary, and it's this kind of crisis that shows that. And that there's this classic case of where the Europeans had got together to arrange procurement, I think, of ventilators, and Britain didn't join the collaboration. And at first they said it was like they lost an email or something, some bureaucratic problem. And then it became clear that it was a political decision. Oh, hang on, sorry. Adam, I'm just on a Zoom. I'll speak later, bye. Sorry. So then it became clear that it had been a political decision. And it was, you know, obviously it cost lives. So there's a sense that Europe, you can see the potential of collaboration and how beneficial that would be. The fact that the Europeans actually haven't collaborated, you know, they didn't come together to help Italy, for example. You know, it was China that helped Italy. I think, you know, also leads people to feel, you know, Europe isn't, you know, fit for purpose. But I mean, the conclusion of that isn't necessarily Brexit. It could be to remain and to fight for that collaboration. So I think the whole crisis and Europe's response to it hasn't really, you know, favoured one side or the other. I think that the first question about Johnson and whether he's been strengthened by this, I haven't really been studying the polls. I mean, initially he got a lot of support, and his announcement of the lockdown got a lot of support. And then I suppose the fact that he got the virus and, you know, fought it, you know.
It gives a sympathy, yeah.
Probably, yeah. I mean, so, but I don't know that that's beginning to, you know, I mean, beginning to decline. I mean, firstly, people support the lockdown, actually. You know, he thinks that people are kind of like desperate to get out, but actually, you know, people, I wouldn't say they enjoy it, but they're getting used to, you know, maybe not getting up so early, going to work so early, you know, all that sort of pressure of day-to-day work is leading to people thinking, well, maybe, you know, we could have a shorter working week. I mean, it raises a lot of issues about a different approach to work. I mean, okay, that's amongst the politically active people, but I think it's got an echo amongst, you know, just ordinary workers. People are enjoying the sunshine. There's a sort of slowing down, which connecting to local parks and woodlands and so on. So there's a kind of, and also people are scared, it is scary, the virus, the way it can, the way its infectiousness. So people don't want to come out of lockdown, particularly. The support for coming out and for ending the lockdown is quite low.
Mm-hmm.
So I think also more and more people, particularly scientists, are speaking out. Okay, this might not reach the mass of people, but I think it probably will, because at least there are some media, the Daily Mirror. I mean, obviously the media is a key factor here, but some media are beginning to report more on the scientists who are breaking ranks. I mean, interestingly, there's a group of very high level scientists who've formed an alternative advisory committee, which is independent and transparent. Yesterday it had its first meeting, and it had a public press conference of all the scientists, and journalists could ask, and there was a debate, which there has been all along. There's a debate amongst scientists. There's not one science, but actually the way the government portrays it is that like there's one science. And so at the press conferences every day, you have the Prime Minister or his deputy, and then you have a scientific advisor commenting as if there's just one view. And, in a way, that scientist is probably very, very cowed by the fact that he's like alongside the Prime Minister. And there's a sort of atmosphere as you don't criticize the government. But actually that's beginning to break. And scientists are coming onto radio programs to kind of blow the whistle. And so I think that'll build up a bit like it did with Blair and the Iraq War. But, that was quite slow in actually undermining his popularity, but it did. And I think you might see the same dynamic.
Well, you mentioned Blair, and this brings me to another question regarding the situation in the Labour Party. First of all, I would like to know how the Labour Party, what is the Labour Party's stance in regarding the pandemic? I mean, does it criticize the government, and for what reason? But the main thing, I mean, what is of interest to me is now you have a new leader. And do you think that there is a danger that an alliance is formed between the Blairites, now that you mentioned Blair, and the centrists to isolate the left within the party, which was something, it was a hope, not only for the UK, but for all people in Europe and in some other parts of the world. I mean, the Corbinites were something to which we were all have rested our hopes. Do you think that there is such a danger that the left is isolated?
Well, I mean, obviously, even the victory of Starmer, in my opinion, it illustrates that danger. I mean, he's not, I mean, he can't be seen as a Blairite. He's not a rightist. I mean, I once knew him when he was young, and he was a particular kind of Trotskyist. But I mean, a lot of Trotskyists then kind of flip. Well, a lot of leftists sort of flip. But and he didn't exactly flip to the right. He just became a very effective kind of administrator, the Department of Public Prosecutions. But he wasn't, in my opinion, he wasn't brave. He didn't take risks. And now he's leader of the Labour Party, and he's stuck under pressure. I mean, you've got to remember that most of the members, have been on the left, and they still believe in the policies. So while some of them voted for him, they did so partly on the understanding that he would carry on Jeremy Corbyn's and the Labour Party's left policies. But the key difference, and it's a very important one, is that Corbyn wasn't just left in terms of his policies, but he was very explicitly, very day-to-day, very organically connected to and supporting day-to-day struggles around those policies. So he was always on demonstrations, you know, like the day he was elected, his first action that afternoon was to go and support a demonstration against the sort of racism against refugees and to give support to refugees. And so he's always had that relationship to the, if you like, the social movements, the trade unions that were fighting. You know, he and John McDonnell would join the picket lines of precarious workers in McDonald's. You know, so he was challenging the parliamentarism, which had traditionally dominated the Labour Party. So, you know, people will remember Ralph Miliband's book, Parliamentary Socialism, where he said that the British Labour Party was dogmatic, not about socialism, but about parliament, about the primacy of Parliament. And why, in fact, why Jeremy Corbyn was such a threat, and John McDonnell and the whole movement, was because not just it believed in nationalisation, public ownership and redistribution, but because it was building up and supporting forms of power outside of Parliament. And I don't want to be romantic about that, but that's what was going on. And Starmer has none of that. He is a parliamentarist to his core. Now, I think the right will try and make the most of him. I mean, in a sense of making alliances with him that could have the danger of marginalising the left. I mean, I think that the left is still in a state of debate as to what to do. I mean, you know, there's this question: do you stay in and fight? Do you work outside? And what, you know, how do you relate to the new Labour Party?
Is the left still divided on the European issue, or is that something of the past? What do you think?
I think beneath the surface it's still divided, but I think now new divisions are emerging. And I mean, to some degree, there's a bit of blaming of the people who supported Remain for the defeat. But I mean, I don't know. Things have moved so fast from you know, the period when we were all debating what had gone wrong to now the crisis, the pandemic, and so these debates are rather a bit on hold, a bit fluid, and people are thinking more about what sort of new opportunities. You know, this whole idea of crises produce opportunities, which is what the right did. You know, so in the way that Naomi Klein demonstrated, they grasped opportunities to further their own policies. And in a way now the left is saying, well, you know, there are many examples of solidarity, of new kinds of thinking about work, new kinds of thinking about the importance of the state, new kinds of neighborhood solidarity, you know, the importance of the NHS, you know, so there are opportunities as well as problems arising from this crisis that will shift the debate. And I think, you know, John, in a way, thinking about how has the Labour Party responded, I think John McDonnell and Jeremy, they're still very active. I mean, they're still intervening and making things clear. So, I mean, maybe it's my networks. I see more of what John McDonnell is saying, which is very clear on the government's failings, than what Keir Starmer is saying. I mean, I don't feel he's really holding the government to account. He's sort of criticising it, and but you know, not adequately, and not in a way that is sort of tied into what movement or unions are saying. Like, for example, the teachers' union are saying, "Hang on, don't send the schools back until we know more about, you know, the impact of children and so on. But Keir Starmer is saying, you know, that the schools should go back because of the inequalities in what happens when kids are at home. I mean, which I think is important, but I think more important is the safety and health issue.
Okay, let's now go to the last part of my questions. We are going fast. I mean, the world is going fast, and Europe more than the rest of the world, towards a very deep recession. Some, I could say, conservative estimates for the UK coming from the IMF speak about 6.5 minus 6.5% fall in the GDP, and a very big company with a research department, Société Générale, forecasts something around minus 10%. And in other parts of Europe, things might be even worse. So everybody knows that during a recession, governments will try to put all burden in the working classes and generally the lower strata of the society. And the result will be a rise in unemployment, a rise in the already very high precarity, a rise of poverty, and all this stuff. We know that from the past and from the previous crisis. So my question is, do you believe that trade unions and social movements in Britain, first in Britain, and then we can speak about the EU countries, are in a position to resist this class attack, which will surely come from the government in the UK first?
Yeah, I mean,
is there a spirit of resistance? Is there something like that? Or everybody now, due to the pandemic, is sitting safe at home?
No, I think, I'm not sure one can talk about resistance, but I think, and I think that what's required is both resistance, but also a vision of a different kind of economy. I mean, I think there's got to be some different vision of the way out of the recession. And I think, you know, a lot of issues that were laid out by the Labour Party under Corbyn, well, basically two things. The Green New Deal, the sort of whole thinking about a greener economy, obviously comes massively to the fore, because one of the industries that will be particularly affected by the recession, you know, you can see it in the redundancies already being announced, is the aviation industry. And so I don't think the aviation industry will recover, you know, to pre sort of pandemic proportions. And so there, the key thing will be ideas about expanding the railway system, you know, developing ecological forms of transport. And I think similarly, the whole move to a low carbon economy, you know, is absolutely, you know, the situation cries out for it. And in some ways, the labour movement's ready, because a lot of the work has been done in the course of preparing for a Labour government. You know, so I mean, John McDonnell and his team have thought about and are thinking about these ideas. And the unions, I don't know. I mean, I did a bit of work to look into the conversion of engineering capacity to make ventilators, and this was in an Airbus factory. And there, the union, I talked to the union locally and nationally, and the National Union Unite, their officer for manufacturing, said yes, this would feed into their thinking about a Green New Deal. So, I mean, I think also there's a learning from what happened in 2008 and the financial crisis, that there was a mass education from experience of seeing how the crisis has been solved, you know, at the expense of working people and in favor of the banks. And I think there's enough awareness of that in the unions that will say no, people will resist. I think also the lessons about the NHS will become clear, you know, that people will be concerned to defend the NHS in a way that they haven't been sufficiently militant up till now. But I think, so they'll be what I'm really saying is that people will be very open to radical and militant ideas and practice. And so therefore, there's a huge onus on the left, such as it, you know, it's there, but it's not very well organized at the moment. But there's a huge onus on us to follow through that openness with more direct, more accessible forms of political education and campaigning. And some parts of the left are ready for that. I mean, you know about the World Transformed, which organised those really good events at Labour Party conference. And
in fact, the World Transformed is now a Transform member, you know?
Yes. Well, that's great. That's good. Makes complete sense. And they're very well organised. They've been doing brilliant Zooms. Sorry, I'll just get some water. Brilliant sort of webinars about the crisis. They're extending their educational capacities way beyond the one event every year. They've got local groups. So, I mean, there are many ways in which the left is getting prepared, and this period of both crisis and danger, but also of sort of being able to think and talk and plan in a way, although it's always on Zoom and that's dependent on the Wi-Fi. But and actually that's another thing. Everybody now, you just have to kind of make jokes and people agree. Like the whole idea of, I don't know whether you were aware, but one of the manifesto commitments of the Labour Party was to public broadband being available for everybody, you know, good, strong broadband. And now everybody's saying, well, yes, that's what we need, you know. So at the time it was considered a bit mad, you know, but now it's, everybody's saying, you know, why didn't we go for that public broadband?
Okay, well, I'm not so optimist as you are, neither for the UK nor for the rest of Europe. But anyway, it's true that there is an opportunity now to speak to people and to just show to them the impasse of the present economic system. But I don't know what will be the response from their part, and I'm sure that the media will just bombard the people for the need to be united in the name of the nation and all this stuff. And this is not a good thing. But anyway, I think it's time now to leave you in the hands of Angelina and Barbara, and I will sit down and wait to see how you respond.
Okay, and they'll come in as well and disagree.
Well, yeah, of course.
Thank you so much, Harris. Thank you, Hilary, for this first part of the interview. Many people, you know, are chatting in the chat box. They say various things regarding Brexit, the Labour Party, etc. We have so far 2 questions in the Q&A box. I read the first one. So, Hilary, MacDonald is one of the strategic leaders of the Labour Party. What is his role now under Starmer's leadership?
Okay, well, I don't know what it is officially. You know, I'm not, you know, I'm not sort of part of the inner group, but clearly in his own behaviour, which is the way to judge him, is that or judge his role. He's not in an official position with Starmer. He's not on the shadow. He refused to be in the shadow cabinet. So
was he asked to be?
No, he ruled himself out at the beginning, you know. And so he's remarkable. I'm a complete fan, more so now even than before, because as soon as the election, you know, after the defeat, after Christmas, he organized regular seminars in Parliament. Then now he's always talking, responding, explaining. He's like a real educator. He's supporting the World Transformed. He supports, you know, any sort of left initiative. So I think that his role is as a kind of independent political voice, carrying on the kind of ideas that he was so well known for under Corbyn. I mean, I think that he's not, in a way, it doesn't really matter that he's not got an official position, and he's not opposed to Starmer. He's very, well, I'm not either. It's a matter of, you know, sort of carrying on independently, not having great faith. I don't have any faith that Starmer will lead the way forward, you know, but I don't think that the priority should be on challenging him, but simply acting independently. And particularly with policy, I mean, John is very, very emphatic about policy development, so we're not going to rest on our laurels, the laurels of the last manifesto, which was brilliant, but we need to develop the ideas and develop them in practice and with the kind of people who can campaign for them. So that's what he's doing.
Oh, there is a short question. Annelies Todds, the current Sandow minister, is a fellow friend and comrade of MacDonald?
Yeah. Yes,
This was a
I
question
think
from a participant.
put her into the Treasury team. So obviously they get on together and probably, I mean, I don't know, but they're probably in contact with each other.
Sorry to intervene, but since we are in this area, and what about Corbyn himself?
Well, he seems to be being, you know, like he always was, very engaged with local communities. So in all this crisis, he's working with communities in Islington in his constituency. So he's playing, and then he'll make statements about the health service or about some scandal, you know, involved in the government's behaviour. So he's very much there, but kind of in his modest and sort of almost like public servant kind of way, you know, supporting struggles, supporting you know, people on the left, supporting. He's quite supportive of the World Transformed and so on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the next question we have from a participant is if you could share your thoughts on the issue of public and private partnerships, agreements that many of Starmer's shadow ministers have supported in the past.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been critical of the idea of public-private initiatives because, you know, in almost all the cases so far, it's been a matter of the private being the dominant partner. And therefore, it's been usually a first step towards privatization. And that instead, I don't think the answer is the state as it is, but more kind of partnerships between, well, what some people call public-public or public-civic, or, you know, so partnerships between national government and local government, or between local governments across Europe, or between national governments across Europe, or between government and the trade unions, or government and cooperatives, you know, so where there's a common belief in the priority of the public and a sort of economics based on need rather than on the market and on profit. then there can be a partnership. But a public-private one is just completely anathema, in my opinion, to what the public sector is about. It also undermines democracy because, you know, if you have a private partnership, then the elected politicians aren't fully accountable for the management of those industries or services, and therefore you need a public or public partnership in which democracy is absolutely the driving force that defines and determines need and how it's met. But maybe the questioner wants to disagree.
Thank you. Okay, we have a new one. How are the latest developments within the Labour Party discussed by the Momentum team? How are the discussions between the left outside the Labour Party, for example, the Left Unity formation and Momentum?
Yeah, I think at the moment there's quite a lot of discussion about the future of Momentum, and a lot of people are stressing the need to make it more democratic, open it up so that there's more work with movements outside. I don't think the issue is to do with left unity and other political formations. It's more Momentum becoming more responsive to social movements. I mean, in a way, the problem, as I see it, and this is just my personal opinion, is that Momentum was kind of sucked. I mean, there's been always a tendency on the left, once you join the Labour Party, to get sort of sucked into the internal machine, and that, you know, that winning positions in the Labour Party has become absolutely dominant. And in a way, you could say, well, that worked. You know, we won the Corbyn leadership, but I never felt that winning the leadership meant the party itself had changed. And that, in a way, what happened with Momentum is that it ended up being the kind of force that defended Corbyn internally against the attacks from the parliamentary party, the right, which dominated the parliamentary party, acted absolutely, you know, irresponsibly. I mean, not just irresponsibly, but in my view, completely undemocratically. Whereas in the past, the left always would, in the end, unite with the right-wing or centre leadership, you know, around election time, even if it disagreed. So, you know, the Tribune group or the Bevanite group or even Tony Benn, he would never, he'd be very critical of Blair before the elections. And when it came to elections, he would, you know, actually unite without pretending that he was completely in support of him. And whereas this time, the right, you know, even after the second time that Corbyn was elected and it was clear the membership was supporting him, it was like the PLP, that's the parliamentary party, didn't care two hoots about the membership. For them, they were like they had the moral, you know, the moral right, the sort of presumption really to determine the future of the party, and they just attacked Corbyn in the most kind of, you know, I don't know, brutal and sort of uncomradely and destructive of their own careers, actually, in the end, because they lost out in the last election as well as the left. So I think that's the problem with the Labour right.
Can I say something, Angelina, or do you have another question?
Yes, please.
Yeah. In one of the webinars that you've mentioned, or Momentum webinars that I followed, McDonnell said that one of the big problems in the previous period, and the fact that the left was defeated in the party, was that they were the leadership, and not only the leadership, but also the people around it, were too much involved in the Westminster bubble, instead of working with the trade unions, with movements and all this stuff. And I found this something which reminded me of what happened to Syriza, for example, in Greece, after a period. Do you think that now there is a chance of getting back to the roots, going back to the roots, rather, to the social movements, to the real people, not only to the Parliamentary Labour Party saga?
I didn't quite finish what I was saying. It was my fault because I'm a bit cold.
You are the woman who comes in the cold.
Yes. Anyway, yes, no, they didn't transform, I have to say, to participants, didn't force me into the cold. It was my lack of Wi-Fi. But so I'm sitting outside a very interesting social centre in Hackney that does have good Wi-Fi, although they're not open. But the point of these attacks on the right, and not the point of them, but the result of them, and was that momentum and a lot of the left got drawn into an internal battle, which was partly the Westminster bubble and partly the party bubble. So, it was all its energies were geared to that defensive role rather than the looking out. And so that's why I can understand what happened to momentum, but it did mean it lost a lot of those roots. As to the party leadership, I have to say that Corbyn and McDonnell, they didn't get sucked into the parliamentary bubble generally. I mean, here they were different from Tsipras because, from the beginning, I remember in Red Pepper, which I must come back to later, we interviewed Corbyn at the beginning, and he told us that every Wednesday he would leave Parliament and spend Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, half the week, actually speaking around the country. And similarly, John McDonnell had a constantly going out mentality. So I think on the other hand, that after 2017 and the fact that Labour did so well and was kind of able to portray itself as a government in waiting, plus the pressures of Brexit and the danger of a no-deal Brexit, did mean that the Labour Party did conduct itself more and more like a government in waiting, and did therefore become seen as a more parliamentary party and a bit distant from the mass of people. So even though they did these personal routines of going out and talking to people, the media portrayal of the Labour Party was these battles against no-deal Brexit in Parliament. So I think it's not quite the same as the Tsipras and Greek case, but there was this pressure of having done so well. They looked like, and they wanted to present themselves. So it's more like a media strategy to present themselves as a government in waiting, which inevitably meant a parliamentary government in waiting.
Okay.
Thank you very much, dear Hilary. Well, we do know that you do not give this interview under the best conditions, and we don't.
I'm enjoying it. So we
don't want you to get a cold at all.
No, don't worry.
And then you will blame us, transform, blah, blah, blah. So I do believe that, okay, since it is already 8 o'clock Central European Time, I think that we can finish this interview. Maybe you can say a few conclusive remarks or something that you really want to be reminded.
Okay, well, firstly...
Something about the red pepper also,
yes,
please.
Exactly.
Let's advertise the red pepper.
Yes, because I think that we've talked about the importance of the media, and in one of Harris's questions that she hasn't asked, he asked, he said, "Will you now leave the Labour Party? Because you joined. I joined because of Jeremy. You know, will
I
I
said
now
that in
leave?"
private. I said that in private.
Oh, okay, yeah.
If you want to,
Okay.
to speak
No, well,
openly, it's okay.
my attitude is, I'm not going to leave. I'm going to keep my party membership, partly because in where I live, many of my comrades are in there, and they're not parliamentary. They're working with tenants groups, with precarious workers, and they've managed to shift the Labour Party in Hackney in that direction. So I find going to Labour Party meetings is rewarding. It's not bureaucratic. It's actually about struggles, including with the council, but also sometimes the council is supporting us. So I won't leave, but I will put more of my energies, or continue to put my energies into outside the party. I mean, and Red Pepper is a good example, because I think that we need an alternative media, like anything. It's like, that's one of the lessons. And there is quite a good sort of, media, alternative media infrastructure. Not just Red Pepper, but Novara, Tribune, New Internationalist, a lot. And so, but it's a struggle. I mean, it's really difficult. I mean, Red Pepper's now been going for 25 years, almost longer than I've known Harris. And that is amazing, but it's been like a constant struggle. Now we've got many young people, young editors. I'm like a complete granny, but I don't actually, they're doing, I mean, I do some work for it, but they're doing the main work and developing the strategy together. So it's hugely exciting just now. And I think, we really need people to subscribe, and Red Pepper sees itself as a resource for movements. So to work very closely with the World Transform and with people like John McDonnell, and help the educational capacity that we so badly need. And working with Transform, I hope, because we've always taken a very European and internationalist view. So I think also that's a bit of a model for what I'd say about the future of the left. Learning from experiences, negative and positive, in Greece and in Spain and France and so on, that we have to maintain our autonomy politically. We've got to keep the movement's strength and strategic intelligence, so not just organizational strength, but strategic thinking. We've got to keep that developing. But we know now that we need the state, we need electoral successes, but we mustn't get engulfed or dominated by electoral politics. The electoral politics has got to be a resource for where the creativity and the power really lies, which is in the movements. So I think that kind of ability to sort of walk on in two ways. I don't know quite the right metaphor, because there aren't many things that work on attention. So we've got to avoid dichotomies of either or. It can be and the famous artist Kandinsky, he had a whole essay on and I want to say there's a politics in and we must develop that. I mean, and that and, it's a simple word, but it's very complex, actually combining the two, and Harris and others in Greece know that. But that's what we've got to do. And we didn't really find the answer to that in Britain. And I think that was maybe one of the problems. But Jeremy did personify that, both Jeremy and John. They were in Parliament and they were outside Parliament. So John and those of us who worked in the London Council, in the 80s, we had this slogan, "In and Against the State," arising from a very important book with that title. But I think now we've got to say "in and against the Labour Party." So we're in it, but also a little bit wary and a bit independent. So I better stop there, but please subscribe to Transform's newsletter and to Red Pepper. And because we're a resource for the movement, we say you pay as you feel. So it can be just £2 a month, or it can be more. And so far we've managed to succeed in growing enough to at last pay our writers a bit, and that's really important, because you know the position of precarious writers and researchers is much worse than when we began. Sorry, my battery is running low, so I might just disappear.
Thank you so much, Hilary. Thank you so much. Thank you for accepting the invitation.
And thanks to everybody.
We did as well. We did as well. Harris, thank you also very, very much for this wonderful question.
And, I mean, Hilary is always a source of inspiration for us.
No, vice versa.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I also want to thank Barbara, because she was keeping track of the chat all the time, and she was posting all the details and various links to things that you were referring to. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you all for attending. And please stay tuned, because we have many, many webinars scheduled. You can visit our website. We have a special tab named webinars, and everything is announced there. And also the video of this web interview will be uploaded on our website. Thank you so much. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Be safe, be calm.
For organizing it so well and being so patient with my Wi-Fi.
Thank you for doing this.
Take care.